Hello, Mount Calvary. Welcome to our biblical reflection on this second week of Advent. If you're watching this when it's posted, this is going to be in lieu of my normal Facebook conversation because I have a board meeting tonight. If you're not watching it tonight, of course, then I hope you just enjoy this reflection for your Advent season. What we're doing in these three videos, I had one last week, I have one this week, and then one next week. We're going to look at Matthew chapters 1 and 2, and we're going to look at it from the lens of real life. We're going to see what it means for Jesus to come in the midst of real life. As I said, Luke tends to be one that we have this grand narrative, this epic tale around. And we could do the same thing there. We could look at how real life is for everyone. But Matthew kind of lends itself for that. This book kind of lends itself to seeing the reality around Jesus, especially with his family and what his family had to endure. So we're going to read from chapter 2. We're going to read the first half, and then next week we're going to wrap up chapter 2 for our devotions and our biblical reflections this season. So if you would, you can look at the screen. If you have your own Bible and you like to read from that, that's fine too. But the words will be there for Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the territory of Judea, during the rule of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east, and we've come to honor him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. He gathered all the chief priests and the legal experts and asked them where the Christ was to be born. They said, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found out from them the time when the star had first appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you found him, report to me, so that I too may go and honor him." When they heard the king, they went and looked. The star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling to their knees, they honored him. They opened up their treasure chests and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Because they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country by another route. This passage is really important, especially the beginning. We tend to focus on the latter half, and that's great because that's where Jesus is, right? The baby in Bethlehem. And as many pastors, I'm sure, have told you, the Magi probably were not there during the actual nativity. They're probably still in Bethlehem because of the census. And remember, they're not from Bethlehem. They had to travel there because of David being in Joseph's line. And so it's around the time that Jesus has been born, probably not the nativity itself. But that doesn't mean we can't talk about it during Christmas time. In fact, this is really important to understand the context into which Jesus was born. And I think that's what we're really exploring here these 3 weeks. What does it mean for Jesus to be born in our world? And there's actually a verse that I want to put up on the screen that you probably don't think captures the entirety of the world in which Jesus was born. It was verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. Remember, during this time, the Jewish people had a prophecy for a Messiah, and they believed that Messiah would come and change the political landscape. They would become the King of Kings of Israel, better than David. Better than, of course, Saul, but better than any other king that they had. They thought that quite literally. And so when this was coming to pass, as the Magi come and tell Herod and Jerusalem about this, they both get worried, surprisingly, for the same reason. They both want to keep what they have. Herod doesn't want any king of the Jews to come up. He doesn't want that. He wants to hold on to his power that is politically motivated from Rome. He wants to keep that as much as he can. And we're going to see next week a lot of things that he does to make sure that he does keep it. Because as we read at the end of this passage, the Magi, they leave. They go on a different route. So King Herod is very troubled, but so is Jerusalem. Why would Jerusalem be troubled? Not because they have any idea of their sins or what that means or anything like that. You know, there's some preaching and some teaching that kind of go there, and I think you can maybe make the case, but it's a bit of a stretch. It's more that the religious leaders, especially of Jerusalem, are worried. They're worried that they're going to lose their power too. See, Christ, the Christ, before they know it's Jesus, the Christ is one who will come to restore the kingdom to God. And the religious leaders are incredibly worried about that because they have the power. And it's not because they're Jewish, it's not because they're Pharisees, it's not because of any of that, it's because they're human beings. And so this verse actually captures the context in which Jesus is born. He's born in Bethlehem in the midst of an empire by the Roman emperor and Roman soldiers, but also in the midst of a political, social, cultural, and religious stranglehold by people in power. And they get nervous because they think that the Christ is going to become a king that will change all of that. And little do they know, they are dead right. Not in the way that they think, of course, but they are more right than they can possibly imagine. And that's why the Magi are so important, because the Magi come and they, as we learn on Epiphany, they change the world for everybody. They make it so that this Jewish king, this Jewish baby, is not just the savior of the people of Israel, but the entire world. And that's the signal, of course, that the text is telling us. Mary and Joseph have no idea. Of course they don't. They're just people like you and me. They're probably confused and wondering how these fancy spices, this gold is being given to such a little child from people afar that they've probably never even heard of. But we, hearing this entire story, we know that this signals something quite big. It signals for Herod, for the religious leaders of that time, and for all people who seek power. It signals that Jesus has come into this world to subvert that power and change it. And then to give hope through his work, through his words, and through the love that he has for us. We're going to unpack a lot more of that political fear, that worrying that's happening in this text. But I think it's really refreshing to hear a story that recognizes the reality of our world, that people in power want to keep that power. And of course they're going to be worried, and they're going to do everything they can to kind of stifle it. And that's why Herod wants them to come back and tell him where the child is. But Jesus has different plans. Jesus doesn't work the way the world wants him to work. And we thank God today on this second week of Advent that that's entirely true. That's the hope that we have. It's the joy. That's our week for this week. Joy. It's in between peace and joy, right? So we've got the peace from last week and the joy of this week. The peace that our King is a King of peace, and the joy that he is more than an earthly king. He is a king forever and for always. Enjoy the rest of your Advent week. We will see you on Sunday, 9:30 worship time here on YouTube. On Facebook, there will be a link for the YouTube. And then, of course, if you're healthy and if you are not at risk, we invite you to join us for worship on Sundays at 9:30 a.m. We will see you then. And then, of course, next week we will have our final midweek Advent biblical reflection.